My next show.
Right, for those wondering, right, what's going on? Tuesday nights, it's not Rodigan's night. Surely 7 p.m. on a Sunday is where you usually catch Rodigan. But, of course, if you've been checking me out throughout the week on the brand new time slot that I've been doing every weeknight from 7, you'll know that on Tuesday nights, I like to have a sit down and have a bit of a chit chat. Well, it's more than a bit of a chit chat. We've been going in depth with some of your favorite artists, and I thought to myself, there doesn't get any more legendary, does it? The story, the career, the path, the inspiration, the levels don't get any more legendary than the man who's sitting across the room from me right about now. David Rodigan is in for In Depth.
How do I follow that, Target?
Well, like, I feel like, how do I follow it?
Big up.
How do I even sit down with a man whose career has spanned already over 40 years and is still going stronger than ever?
It's the music keeps us young, keeps us alive. It fills us with joy, it fills us with passion. Without the music, I'm lost. I was always a music freak from when I was young, and I think most people are. Whether it's folk music, rock music, classical music, rap, jazz, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Music gives us solace, it gives us peace, it gives us joy, it lifts our spirits. And boy, if you love to dance like I love to dance, and I may not be Michael Jackson, but I can swing it when I'm ready.
Listen, I've seen you in action many times, David, and yeah, like you definitely know how to shake it.
As they say in Jamaica, man, have a brocco.
We're going to talk about all the brocking out you've done over your years, and we're going to touch on, the legendary clashes from the studio sessions to some real legendary moments. But I kind of want to go back, and you mentioned like you've been a music freak since young. What made you gravitate towards the wonderful, melodic, soulful, everything we love and know about reggae? What dragged you to reggae back then?
It was a magnet. I mean, none of us could resist it. Remember, we're talking 60s.
Yeah.
So this thing came in like a tidal wave from the West Indies. We were nuts for this ska beat. Why? It was infectious. It was loaded with energy. We couldn't figure out half the things they were saying. But boy, the beat was bionic.
Wow.
And how could you not dance to Guns of Navarone, Phoenix City, all these big tunes? And we're also nuts about Otis Redding and Sam and Dave and the whole Tamla thing and the Atlantic thing and the Stax thing down in Memphis and Curtis Mayfield and the sound of Chicago. I mean, this was deep soul. This was rich soul. And then the other side of the coin was what was rolling in from the West Indies. And we were just, when you're 16, you like to own stuff.
Yeah.
You like to discover stuff. You think, you've discovered stuff that your parents don't know about, even some of your mates don't know about. And you have, groups and gatherings and you go out together, you hang out together. And in those days, it was a very, very different world. So it really was girls, records, and football. It was that nuts.
That doesn't sound like a bad trio of hobbies, to be fair.
For a youth, man.
Yeah, exactly.
For a youth. That's what you were into. And records was, you wanted to, music was everything. So you purchased those records and then you went around each other's houses and played them. And then you went out and danced them. It was that simple. Life was very simple, but music was so vital.
I wish that life could still be as simple as just literally football, girls, and music. Do you actually remember where you were? Because you was already into music, like you said. You were already collecting records and playing at local parties and stuff. Do you remember where you were specifically, where you were like, what is this? This is a whole new sound. This is something that I've not heard before.
Specifically, Margate Promenade, a hot summer of 67. It was scorching hot.
Wow.
And to escape the heat, there was a beat emulating from a basement below a place called the Grapes Coffee Bar. And I just went down the staircase and there was darkness.
Wow.
And it was chilled. Apart from the light coming from a jukebox and the light over the bar. And I went in, it was like 3:00 in the afternoon. And I heard this music I'd never heard before. I looked at the jukebox. I didn't recognize one single track on the juke. Not one.
Wow. So this jukebox may have been maybe shipped in from Jamaica or somewhere. What was going on there?
What was on? These two guys were Jamaicans and they'd opened a club in Margate called Sloopy's. And the jukebox was all Jamaican records.
Wow.
And ska was the flavor, and Rocksteady was just beginning to kick in. And the guy said, you can hang out here, but you have to feed the jukebox or take a drink or do both.
Wow.
I started feeding the jukebox with sixpences, and that's where I started to discover all these records, some of which I couldn't remember, some of which I couldn't understand. But along with all my other mates, we started hanging out there at night, and we were up in Dreamland as well. So, as I say, it was this cross-fertilization of crazy soul and wild ska beats, and I was completely and utterly hooked.
Wow. Now, if you could pick a record to kind of reflect that feeling, you've already, as soon as before I even finished the question, I could see you I got it already.
It's the one. It was the one I first heard, one of the first I heard, apart from My Boy Lollipop, which is 64, I was a bit younger. But this record, you couldn't go anywhere and not hear this record. In a club, Al Capone, Prince Buster and his All-Stars, completely nuts.
Believe it or not, that is the record. That is the record that you stumbled upon that summer of 67 that you were like, whoa.
Don't call me Scarface. My name is Capone.
Wow. Prince Buster, All-Stars, Al Capone. I know my mum's at home, like, dropping some next-level skanks right about now.
See you later.
It's only right. So, you know, Margate, of all places, is where, you know, you made your reggae discovery, or what would, you know, the music that would then lead you into what we now know and love as reggae music.
Yeah, sure.
The collection of these records, were you collecting these records pretty much straight after? Were they hard to source? Were they even available in the UK?
Yeah, they were, because remember, Jamaicans, West Indians have brought their music with them in all the major inner city areas, London, Leicester, Manchester, Leeds, Bristol, Oxford, and I was a country bumpkin living down in the sticks out in Oxfordshire, but in the town of Oxford, in the city of Oxford, there was a record shop called Russell Acott's, and Jamaicans gravitated to that shop to buy their records. And the thing those days that I never forget was that everyone bought the same records, so it was mums and pops and youths.
Yeah.
The music was a common denominator. It was from Jamaica, and they were nuts about it.
Wow.
And a lot of it was already being made in England. I mean, I didn't even know then that in the summer of 67, this kid called Dandy made a record in London called Rudy, A Message to You. He recorded it in London. That was the original version.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, it's a youth from Jamaica who was living over here. And we had some pioneer record labels, you know. We had Rita and Benny, a Jewish couple who lived up in Stamford Hill and had a record shop, and Jamaicans gravitated to that because they were importing records.
Wow.
You had Chris Blackwell sending records out of the back of a minivan because he'd set up Island Records. You had Trojan Records with Lee Gopthall. And then you had all the inner city record shops where people would go to buy their records. So in Oxford, it was no exception. You went to Russell Acott's, you stood there on a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon or in your tea break, and you listened to the hot new releases that week. The Palmer record label was very dominant at the time. There was so much music around. The problem was keeping up with it. In fact, there was too much. And, you know, that's the thing when you're completely obsessed with something, you
want all of it.
You want all of it. Yeah, you want all of it. So it was a very exciting time. And the other thing is that everything was new. There wasn't any new versions of stuff because everything was the first version.
Which must have been so exciting.
It was amazing. I mean, we'd had Elvis, and then along came the Stones and the Beatles and Stevie Marriott and the Small Faces, and then the whole thing from America, James Brown. So everything there was no carbon copy. These were all original prints of everything. So it was, when you look back on it now, you just think it truly was exhilarating because the whole mod movement, the style, because everything was about style and what you looked like. You had the Who. I mean, the Who.
Wow, like the swag. To be fair, for you know the younger end of the audience, like or anyone who's listening, like those kind of 60s and 70s, the swag levels were so like ridiculously high. Yeah. Like these kids haven't really got anything on what was going on in those days
because it was first time, and also now you see styles coming back. You think, hang on, we were wearing that stuff, and that's the great thing about being part of a generation that was experiencing everything for the first time. You know. It really was, there had been a period of austerity after the war, that's for sure. And when we rolled into the 60s, everything was hot and fresh and new. I mean, the only TV show we had was Ready, Steady, Go. We didn't have Radio 1. We had the pick of the pops on a Sunday afternoon.
Wow.
If you wanted to listen to pop music, you had to listen to Radio Luxembourg.
Wow.
Coming in from Luxembourg. And you were deprived until the pirate radio, Caroline, Radio London.
I was just about to ask you about that as well.
Kenny Everett, John Peel, Johnny Walker. That's where they came from.
Literally, my next question was, the transition from you being, this youngster, hanging around this Margate record shop / hangout type place where you were really just I guess just really falling in love with the music and the whole style and culture. And then you said there was a lack of radio, and I was just about to ask you, when did you make that transition to your first radio set? Because I know all the way back in 1978, it was your first radio show on then Radio London.
That was on 1978 Radio London. Yeah.
Wow.
And talking of radios, I remember when my old man first got a radiogram in the house.
Wow.
And your granddad will probably tell you that story. It was like a spaceship had arrived in the front room. Because he was like, this thing played it played records and it played the radio.
Crazy.
So yeah, from 1978, I got a break on BBC Radio London, and that's where my broadcasting career started with the BBC.
And, going from, I'm imagining 1978, what was like a Roots and Rockers show. It was a Roots Rocker show, wasn't it?
Yeah, that came a little bit later. Initially, it was called the B&B Show, and I don't know why it was called that. And there was a couple of other DJs doing it. Tony Williams was one of them. And then after a year and a half of that, Capital Radio asked me to come and join them, and I did. And I did a Roots Rockers Saturday night show for a long time, 11 years. After it was Greg Edwards' Soul Spectrum. That's the thing, is there was no pirate radio in those days. I mean, once they brought them off the North Sea and closed all that down, and they put them all on Radio 1.
Yeah,
that was it. And then you had on Radio London, you had the Robbie Vincent Soul Show. You had Greg Edwards on a side. You remember there was no hip hop, there was no house, there was no electro, there was no drum and bass. This was a totally different world, Target.
This is like the excitement levels that. No wonder everybody was so excited to discover something that was completely brand new.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Yeah. And the thing is that reggae, once it hit the 70s and the Wailers came in and Lee Perry and the Upsetters,
things just took
and punk was bang, 74, 75, 76. Punk was mashing up this country, and punk's identified with the music. We all know the stories. There was a fusion. There was a common ground.
We're going to talk about, that moving into the 70s and the likes of Bob Marley and the Wailers. And I heard you got a legendary story about Bob Marley. Well, I'm sure you've got many legendary stories, but we're going to go all the way back to your first Bob Marley story. But first, I want to play a record that was down as one of your early radio records. Tell me about this record, The In Crowd.
It was just a massive record. It was number one. We used to have a reggae chart in those days that was published in the Black Echoes newspaper that came out every Thursday morning, and everyone bought that paper at the station. You see everyone, what's the chart? Those charts meant something then. And this was one of the biggest hits of that year.
So, you now were on the radio. You were doing your thing, representing, trying to move this movement and move this music to a bigger and greater audience. But there was still a place that you had to visit.
Yeah.
That place, of course, was Jamaica.
Yeah. And it was January 1979. I'll never forget it. Snow was falling in London. It was freezing. I boarded that flight down to Jamaica and got off. And I'll never forget hitting the wall of heat and the burning tarmac as you had to walk to the terminal.
Wow.
And then it was into a van and then out to Edgewater. Spent my first night there. And the next day, down Maxwell Avenue to Channel 1 recording studios, and standing outside was Earl Zero.
Wow.
And then it began. It was like virtually every corner you turned. Next thing you were on Orange Street, and there was Prince Buster's record shop, and then you were up at Harry J, and there's Bunny Wailer getting out of his Land Rover, and you're like, it's Bunny Wailer. It's Bunny Wailer.
It's like literally Starstruck times 1,000.
Absolutely. And of course, by that time now, King Tubby, the dub master, really was a phenomena.
The legendary King Tubby.
On our second night, I got out to Waterhouse, Kingston 11, and walked into the inner chamber, the place where the king resided. And this man had done so much to change Jamaican music, because he almost single-handedly, along with other engineers, Errol T and Lee Perry, of course, but he really was one of the leading pioneers in creating this music that we now know as dub. I often felt that he was possibly a frustrated jazz musician, because he was taking these 8 tracks and then breaking them all down and echoing them into oblivion and putting these electronic noises and whizzes and bangs through it. But it was the essence of the drum and the bass, or bass and drum as it was called then. And it preempted what we now know as drum and bass. But it was very, very, very significant. And it was a major gear change in the music. And that's where I first met him. And you know what? The man was very, very cool.
I was going to ask you as well.
Very cool. There's Prince Jammy as his assistant engineer, and he said, "I knew Jammy." He said, "Jammy said, Tubby, this is David Rodigan. He's on BBC Radio London. He's playing our music." I just got the look.
Wow.
And I said, I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Tubbs. What do you say,
Yeah.
King? You know? and he just put his hand out and said, yeah, very cool. I said, I jumped the gun, do you think I could do an interview with you?
You straight in there.
Yeah, and he just went, not right now. And no one could smoke in that studio. The studio was immaculate.
And this is in Jamaica.
79.
When, I'm sure many of the studios, even to this day, have a slight aroma flowing through them.
But yeah, when they knew he was approaching the building, all windows were thrown open and and he'd walk in. I saw it on more than one occasion. Who's been smoking? Who's been smoking? Not me, Mr. Tubbs.
Yeah.
Legendary.
Not me.
Yeah, yes. Sir.
Now, for a guy, being from the UK, first time in Jamaica, how were you received first time around? Did you find it at all hard to break down any barriers? Were people kind of standoffish? Were they welcoming because they were just happy that someone from England was supporting the movement? How did it feel?
Well, for some people, it was absolute shock. I mean, absolutely couldn't believe it. I mean, who are you? What you're doing down here? I mean, certain areas that just people like us didn't go.
Yeah.
And there was a certain amount of surprise. But there were also people that knew of what I'd been doing on the radio. I hadn't been on the radio long, but some people knew about that. And of course, like anything, word of mouth. And I was passionate about this music from day one.
Yeah.
And it was an opportunity that I enjoyed because I wanted to share. It's the classic thing. If you're completely nuts about something, you want to turn people on.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
And when you meet like-minded souls, you've got that
just click,
fusion.
yeah.
So that's what it was. And I had a tremendous reception down there. And of course, in later years, I then started working on a radio with Barry G. And then we did the first ever clash in 83 because I was down there doing a show and he was my special guest. And they said they'd never seen so many reggae artists at JBC Radio 1. It's the latest news with Donny Saul. I beg your pardon. And there was this long queue out into the car park. Derek Harriott, Roy, Yellowman, you name it, they were there. And it was amazing because in the evening, Barry G on the Saturday night said, well, allow me to reciprocate because he was the number one DJ.
Yeah.
So I went on his show and at 8 o'clock during the news, he turned to me and went, we are got clash. I said, oh, thanks for the warning, Barry. He said, no, Jamaicans love contests. They love a bet.
Yeah.
They love hype and they love contests. So let's start clashing. So we did. And we were still clashing at 2 o'clock the next morning. That was a 6-hour clash on JBC Radio 1. People still talk about that in Jamaica. The big one was the 85 Sling Tang clash. And as a result of that, I started, making appearances in dances in Jamaica, and that's what used to bring the house down because you walk out the New Kingston Drive-In or down in Belmont by the sea, up in Walter Fletcher Beach, and you walk out and deafening hush because they all thought I was a black guy. Oh, would it? A white man, lad? No, and it was there was a lot of that.
Wow.
And when I first played in Maypen, in clashing against Bodyguard, I came onto the arena, the podium, and you saw all these jaws dropping.
Of course, this is a day and age, pre-internet, pre where people could have just quickly had a quick look. Oh, that's David Rodigan. Oh, yeah. It's not like today where you can find out what someone looks like simply by going on their Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. This was literally, they may have had some audio tapes at best.
Exactly.
Wow.
But there was one song, and I had to play this tonight. I've got it on dub, but I didn't want to play too many dubs because this song really signified that period in time, 78, 79. And it's always that thing and the excitement generated when we discover new music. And that's what the BBC does really well, don't we? We champion
definitely believe
you,
that, man.
and you with the homegrown. And this song played everywhere, Barrington Levy. It was the voice, the tone, the flavour, and the fact that it was preaching love and unity.
All of these records, like, they're stretching back 10, 20, 30, 40 years, some of these records, and they're all sounding incredible. They could all be like 2017 records.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Like that.
There was something about those rhythms that they created in Jamaica which were and still are timeless. They're evergreen. They just work. When they play, people know them. They have that big, heavy bass, and they have something that actually happens when musicians are playing together in that analog freestyle way. 1, 2. No, man, come again. 1, 2. And that classic story at Studio One, talk back. If you don't get it right on the next take, It's an instrumental.
Oh, wow.
That's the famous Coxon quote.
Wow. So like the pressure was on.
Imagine. Because they build the rhythms in the daytime, the musicians, because they were all on wages.
Yeah.
Clock in, clock out.
And
then
voice
at
at
night, the artists would come in having passed auditions, and they'd sing at night or they'd sing at the weekend on a Saturday afternoon. And if they were getting it wrong and they hadn't practiced properly, if you don't get it, the next one, instrumental.
Wow. And some things did make it out of that studio as instrumentals, I'm sure.
But when you think of all the years and how the size of Jamaica, then the size of the capital city, and then the fact that these studios were literally in the western region of the capital city, and there weren't many of them, but the output was prolific.
Like ridiculous.
Day and night.
Ridiculous.
I mean, I just worked with Slide and Bar. We recorded some sessions with BBC One Extra with Slide and Bar and Robbie Shakespeare. And they, Slide and Bar, the classic story from him is the second session he ever did, and they missed the last bus home. So they're walking home, him and Ansel Collins. And he turned to Ansel Collins, he said, I think that rhythm's going to be a million seller. And Ansel Collins laughed because Ansel Collins played the piano.
Yeah.
I'm the magnificent.
Sick.
I'm back with the That record it did go to number one. It absolutely
well worth them
did.
missing the bus home.
Yeah. So you missed the last bus home. It was another world, but there was something that came out of Jamaica in those years, and there's still wonderful music coming out of Jamaica.
It still is like it literally feels like magic. Now we spoke about your early beginnings in Jamaica as such, and you were already establishing yourself here on the radio and going to Jamaica, and news was traveling out there that you were this guy from the UK was supporting everything that was going on, and then you did mention that kind of transitioned over into you performing at dances in Jamaica.
Yeah.
And that initial reaction of people who had no idea you were white, had no idea what you looked like, and probably had a preconception of probably some black guy or a guy who was originally Jamaican but now lives in the UK or something, and then all of a sudden, there you are.
And the worst one was the Apollo Club Willesden.
Oh, wow, in the UK?
Yeah, first ever London gig, walked on stage to cheers that descended into a deafening hush.
Wow.
As hundreds of black people just went, that was a moment.
Wow.
And then the MC said, you better say something or play a dub. And I did, and they cheered, and I was off. I was off, I was off.
I guess it was always kind of that break in the ice.
But the thing is, you see, people trust passion, and they trust knowledge, and they soon smell out a fake.
Yeah, of course.
You get so far on a smile and a shoe shine, but after 10 minutes, you better actually know something.
Yeah.
Or you're out the door. And when it comes to music is very serious for many, many people. So you can't be a wagonist. You can't be hitching your horse to a bandwagon and hoping that you're going to get away with it because you think it's a ticket to ride to fame and fortune.
Yeah.
No, that's not the case. And so the advantage was that I'd been on the radio here in London, on BBC Radio London, for some time before I did a public appearance. So that was the advantage. It was just a surprise. It was just a surprise.
A surprise, yeah.
You thought this guy was a black dude.
A pleasant surprise, though, because, once the set started, it was like, wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. Do you remember that first?
I'll never forget those. I mean, who would? And there was a place in Peckham called the Bouncing Ball, and the joint was run by Vicky and Admiral Ken. And Admiral Ken wore blazers. And he always, when you saw him wherever, he was immaculately dressed, silk shirts, crocodile shoes. You cut your hand on the crease of his trousers. He was the Jerry curl hair, the whole thing. And he always had a bunch of flyers in his left hand because he was always promoting something. And he gave me a residency at the Bouncing Ball in Peckham. And about 3 or 4 weeks in, he came up to me one night and he said, no, listen, you have to switch it up. You can't keep playing the same thing for too long. And in those days, all clubs had their own records.
Yeah.
So he turned around and pulled out 3 12-inch New York imports and said, watch what happens. After I played an hour of reggae, he put these 3 on and the place blew up. And that was that thing of switching it up, because in those days, you had to switch it up. You couldn't just play one style all night. So I had a residency in the West End at Gossets for 20 years in Dean Street.
Wow.
That was the only place you could hear reggae.
Yeah.
But even in there, you had to switch it up. All DJs know.
Yeah,
you have to keep it. You have to switch it up.
It's like so legendary as well. Those blues clubs. But my mum tells me stories about some of those legendary
Unbelievable.
clubs.
The Candy Box. nuts.
Yeah, I'm sure that's one of the ones that she used to mention as well.
And if the guy, when he opened that slat and he looked through the door and he looked at you, if he didn't know you or you weren't there with the right people,
shut.
you weren't coming in there.
That slat's getting shut back.
Yeah, Count Suckle's Q Club in Paddington and up in Birmingham and Manchester and all the places where we used to hang out. All the great sound systems, and then all the blues parties where people would go to listen to the music till 5 and 6 in the morning. Villa Road in Brixton, all those places.
Amazing stuff. Now you did mention, that legendary first clash with Barry G on the radio, which turned into like a 6-hour extended clash. But moving on from that into the live arena, and Jamaica was a place that, like you said, they love contests, they love competition, they love that battle, that it's almost, it is sportsmanship, but it's highly competitive. Do you remember those early clashes in dances?
Can't forget.
You've had some really legendary clashes. Like some of them are still on YouTube. You can go and check out. You've clashed some of the biggest sound systems in the world, from Kilimanjaro through to Bass Odyssey and everybody else. Have you got a favourite clash or a legendary clash that you always just sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, the first one that really stuck out was 85 in Brooklyn. And Barry G and I did, and it was, the snow was falling and there were 4 deep, and we said, what's this cue? And they said, the cue's actually for you guys, and we couldn't believe it.
Wow.
And halfway through the clash, there's a tune there called Ring the Alarm. If you scroll down to that, and we can drop that, because when that played in Brooklyn that night, it was by Tenor Saw, and Tenor Saw was the hottest artist. And it was a very cool dub, because he in those days, and still now, a dub, you have to have your name mentioned, and otherwise it's bogus, counterfeit, doesn't count. and when this played in Brooklyn, the place went absolutely nuts.
Wow.
Some of those dubs, though,
wow.
and some of those clashes, I mean, you're talking about those clashes, and I'm just getting caught flashback here, nuts. I mean, Bass Odyssey in the Bronx.
You must have had some, has it ever got to the point where you're like, I'm losing,
of course.
I've got to do something here, it's all against me.
Oh, absolutely. What? Of course. Where the trap door slowly opens.
Yeah. And you're like,
and you're 5-0 down in a 1-for-1. Wow. And Bass Odyssey, you're just smiling. And they're like, we've got you, you're dead. and you pull back 5-4, 5-3, 5-4, and you're level pegging.
You're looking like you're about to do a Barcelona on them.
Yeah. and that did happen, and it was so incredibly exciting. The first one was 91 in Maypen against the biggest sound at the time, which is Bodyguard, and thousands of people. It was ridiculous. And I one of the big dubs, I go, who's gonna bodyguard you, Mr. Bodyguard? And that ripped down the place. And then I realized, because everyone said, you're crazy, why are you clashing with these Jamaican sound systems? They're not going to beat you up, they're going to chop you up into little pieces, and you'll never. And I said, you know what? That's why it's so exciting. Yeah. And the thing is, because I entered it with a good heart, of course they want to win, and of course they will beat you up, and even when you're playing big tunes, they can kill you with speeches. Yeah. And in '93 against Waggy T in Miami, and then Kilimanjaro, then a big Jaro clash up in Long Island in '97. Wow. I mean, the list is long.
Like, just as you're running through the list, like, I'm getting glimpses of some of the videos, because I've watched a lot of these clashes, and it's like the full rundown of some of those clashes that you've been in.
Because the speeches are very important. The speeches, it's like you're unveiling a statue.
Yeah.
You're unveiling a piece of art, something that's unique to you. Because for people listening and wondering what this whole thing about dubplate clashing is, if you saw the Rebel Sound clash, when we did the Red Bull Culture clash, and you will know that if you don't have your names in these dubs,
they don't mean anything.
Then you're immediately disqualified. It's a joke. So you have to go to a lot of prep. So there you are, you're in it, and your adversary is leading you up a gully, up a canyon, right? And what you don't know is at the end of the canyon, they're going to murder you, because they're wanting you to play certain dubs, and they're leading you on, and then they're setting you up, and then if you play the certain dub, they counteract. Now, the counteraction is the same rhythm or the same artist, but it's voiced specifically for you for that night. And how many counteractions can you play, and how many customized can you play for that night? So that's another world again. And then you've got the classic intro, Ramon the Mexican from the Spaghetti Westerns.
Wow. There must be literally hundreds of thousands of legendary dub plates in your collection. Man.
There's a lot. And you can only play so many dubs in a clash, and that's what some sound boys forget. And they come in the abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. They're like, Oh, I play this, I play that. No, you've just run out of time, son. You've just run out of time.
Wow, some legendary clashes. I'm sure if you guys really search out YouTube and stuff like that, you can find some of David Rodigan's legendary clashes. Bob Marley.
Yeah.
We haven't mentioned Bob Marley as yet.
Well, Bob Marley was and still is. I mean, the Legend album is still in the Billboard Hot 100. I mean, the album charts. This man is a phenomenon. I mean, this man's music brought joy to so many people. He spoke for millions of people. That's why people identified with him. He had this ability to craft songs with wonderful melodies and wonderful messages, be they love songs, but they songs of protest. His observations of day-to-day living. And that was his greatest strength. And those recordings were timeless. And I was a diehard fan. And the first time they came here was in 1974 to promote the Burning album, which is the follow-up to Catch a Fire album. And they were playing at the Greyhound pub.
Wow.
On Fulham Palace Road.
Can you imagine?
I kid you not. No, I kid you not.
Wow.
It was a big music venue, but it was a pub. And I couldn't see them. I just heard... and I hear the voice of the Rasta man. And then they stood up, and there was Peter, Bob, and Bonnie, and the Barrett brothers, and Linda, and it all went off. And it was an amazing night. I'll never, ever forget it. The concert was brilliant. I'm walking down Fulham Palace Road, and literally I thought a shop had caught fire because this enormous cloud of smoke came out of a shop doorway, a belching smoke.
Wow.
And when it cleared, it was Bob Marley having a fag. One of those, kind of fags. And
Bob Marley-esque type fag.
Yeah, yes. And I seized the moment. I couldn't resist it. I rushed over, 60 seconds, you're amazing. And this car screeched up, and he said, I've got to go. Him and Linda got into the car, and I stood on Fulham Palace Road, and as the car pulled away, he turned and waved to me out the back window of the car.
Wow.
I'll never.
I can
forget.
see you
never,
picturing
never,
it. I can
never.
see you picturing it
was
now,
amazing.
David.
Yeah. And then 1980, I'm at Island Records, going up the staircase to the gallery. Who's coming down the staircase? Bob Marley. Unofficial stopover, just parlayed at the Zimbabwe independence celebrations, and it was all unofficial. And I jumped protocol and just said, "You don't know me, but please, I've got a reggae show. Please come on my show tomorrow night." And he said, "Okay." And a couple of elders nodded their approval, and he said, okay. And then he said to me, this is the killer, I've just recorded a new song. Would you like to hear it?
Oh, what? Would I?
So, no, sorry, Bob, I've got to go down the bookies. Sorry, I've got a bet on. So I go back up the stairs with him. Well, I continue up the stairs with him. He takes me into the listening room at Island Records, takes a cassette out of his jeans pocket and presses play. And that was the song.
Just so legendary.
Well, I'm sitting on the sofa, and this came to an end, and he turned to me and he said, do you think this is a good mix for AM radio in New York or FM stereo radio? What do you think? Which is this the appropriate mix? And I'm thinking, no one will believe me. No one will believe me. So I turned to him and I said, well, Bob, I think that's like, what do you want me to say? I mean, what do I know? I said, well, I thought it would be a good stereo mix. He said, great, so you get world exclusive tomorrow night. I bring the master tape. And at the end of the interview, I'm talking to him like this. And I'm so incredibly nervous talking. I can't. It was ridiculous.
Wow.
I couldn't cue up the records.
Wow.
I was shaking in my boots.
Wow.
As a young DJ in the presence of the king of reggae. I mean, even then, he was up there. I mean, superstar.
Incredible.
And he's even more legendary now in his passing because he's left us such an amazing heritage of music, such a phenomenal catalogue of songs.
He's like you said, like constantly inspiring people, to this day, young, old, black, white, whatever. It's just like, he just really touches a place in people that very few others can do.
Without doubt. The soul of Bob Marley.
Most definitely. We've touched on a lot of the early days, and there's no way we'd possibly be able to squeeze in all of your stories. Even looking up at the clock, it's like, wow, we've got 11 minutes left.
Crazy, right?
And David Rodigan is in for In Depth. I want to kind of bring things up just a little bit, to a more recent time, because reggae music in more recent times feels like it's bigger and more widespread and more accessible than ever before. Would you agree with that, David?
Oh, absolutely, because look what's happening. Ed Sheeran's hit record is a dancehall record. Big up Ed Sheeran. Big up Stormzy. That's a dancehall beat.
Yeah.
Drake, dancehall beat. Rihanna,
Everyone's
dancehall
at
beat.
it.
Yeah, Sean Paul's back in. with
Alicia
vengeance.
Keys,
Yeah.
like everybody's influenced and inspired by it.
Exactly. So it's not going away. It's always been there. And the thing I like about it is that the people who love it, they own it.
Yeah.
And if it gets load of radio play, great. And if it doesn't, so what? Those who love it will gravitate to it and they'll discover it, whether the sound boys from Switzerland or southern Italy or Sicily or wherever it is, or Romania. And there are sound boys and girls all over the world that are into this culture. So they will gravitate towards it. And it is an incredibly popular music format. There's no two ways about it. It has an energy, it has an excitement, and it keeps popping up. And when people get it, they get it. And they get hooked. You know, you've got Eastern European dancehall bashment parties.
It's crazy.
You know.
Like the way that dancehall and reggae has literally swept the world and got so many different cultures and people into it. It is incredible.
Amazing.
The love coming in right now as well is incredible, as we would expect. Lots of people have got questions of their own. Harry says, do you think you would have the same passion for Jamaican music if you were an up-and-coming DJ today?
Of course I would, because music is universal, and when you hear it and it touches your soul, it's irresistible. It's just that. It is, I mean, okay, it was a different era, but there are incredibly exciting records coming out of Jamaica and worldwide at the moment that I would classify as reggae music, so the answer is yes.
Without doubt. Hi Target and David Rodigan. What advice would you give to new up-and-coming DJs and sound systems that are not well known or heard about on the music scene?
Don't worry about dub plates. Don't worry about spending your money on dub plates. Worry about getting the right records played in the right order and speaking when it's necessary and not too much. One of the things that I think that kills dances sometimes is that DJs think that they've got to rabbit all over the music. Yeah. You could take another extreme where house music, where there's no MC and the music does completely breathe all of its own accord. So find that happy balance, know how to turn on the crowd, play for the crowd, don't play for yourself, and believe in yourself. Go out there with passion. Moody DJs are boring. You go out there to entertain, not to throw wobblies.
And anybody who's been out to a David Rodigan set, like, you can't even keep behind the decks.
No,
like,
I can't.
You're right, like you're literally enjoying it that much, and you can see it.
Yeah, because you need to get close to the. Because the only difference is, if I wasn't out there dancing, I'd be in there and the audience
crowd, yeah,
dancing.
exactly.
That's the thing. There's no, and it's just that simple. So passion, joy, love, and attention to detail.
Without doubt. Quickly squeeze in one more of these questions. Wondering if David is going to go and see the One Love, the Bob Marley musical at the Birmingham Rep in the next few weeks. Do you know about that even?
Yeah, I was aware of that. Yeah, no, I think they might be bringing back The Harder They Come as well. But I did hear about the One Love musical, yes, indeed. And no doubt I'll try and get up there if I can.
Also, I wanted to ask you, because you were at one stage pursuing an acting career.
Yeah, I mean, I did for many years. I was in Sherlock Holmes, I was in Doctor Who, I was in loads of things.
Wow.
And I was in theatre as a jobbing actor in the 70s. And I absolutely loved it. And this whole DJing thing was a sideline. You know, I played records at the weekends when people invited me to, come to a house party, play your records. There was always something like that. And I have to point out, actually, this is very poignant, that back in the day, the DJ it really wasn't a big thing to be the DJ, because who's that guy over there? Who's the fat guy? Who's the skinny guy over there? Oh, he's just the DJ. He's just the DJ. I remember that. Who's the guy with the glasses? Oh, he's just the DJ.
Wow, putting just at the front.
No, but that's
now
how
it's
it
like,
was.
he's the DJ guy.
Believe you me, there was a guy that looked like Elvis in Brett's club, and he played with his back to the audience because it didn't matter. He just played hit records. There were no speeches. He just queued them up and he played them one after the other.
Wow.
And then they had two turntables and they called segways. The mixing hadn't been invented.
We've come a long way.
The DJ
Amazing.
is now the
Amazing. Tell us about your book as well, David, because people can really go real in depth.
Well, it was Damian Marley that brought that on 3 years ago at a festival, a carnival festival after party, and he turned to me, he said, "Where's the book?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You need to write a book." And a number of people
He was right, to be fair.
Well, and I figured, you know what? I'll take that telling from him. And he said, "You knew my dad, why don't you write a book? This is our music, this is our culture. More of it needs to be recorded for history." And I said, "Do you know what? You got a point." And I teamed up with Ian Burrow, who's a writer whose work I've admired for years on The Independent, working as a writer there, journalist. And we got together, and it took us 2 years, and it's out and it's doing really well. Yeah.
Incredible. People want to go grab it. What's it called?
It's called, funnily enough, My Life in Reggae.
Go. Funnily enough, no surprises there.
Yeah, I mean it's more than that, but I mean, I have to extend thanks to people like James Breakage and Casper, who really changed my world and took me outside of my reggae bubble 7 years ago when they introduced me to another world, and as a result of appearing on that record, Hard. I mean, that just really did change my world, Breakage, when he made that record. And it was so big that when I did this big cup clash in the East End, I got Footsie to do a customised on the night. And
wow. Everybody knew of David Rodigan, I feel like. But like you said, that kind of just thrusted you into what was at the time a thriving dubstep scene and bass scene in the UK in general.
Yeah, because he sampled the voice from a speech I'd done in a clash, I don't know where, and that was it, yeah.
Wow. And that's still, I draw for that probably once every 6 months or so, just to shut down somewhere. Always goes off, Dave. Always. I can't believe it. Like, I knew the time was gonna fly. I knew that just having this conversation with you was gonna make this hour literally evaporate like candy floss. But it still caught me by surprise that we've got like a minute left. And there is so much we could talk about. Like, there's so much we have spoken about as well. Everything from, your early days, discovering reggae and going to Jamaica for the first time, meeting Bob Marley and the likes of King Jammies and all of these legendary guys. And I feel like we could have done like a part 1 to 5 with David Rodigan on this in-depth thing.
Well, thanks, Target. I mean, I've been following you for 4 years on a Sunday night.
Yeah, it's
nice to be on in there with you one-to-one.
Now you've got Trevor Nelson, who of course is another one of our highly esteemed colleagues as well. But I still lock in on a Sunday evening, as does my mum. She's always locked into the show.
Yeah, because you're around there having your dinner.
She's like, he hasn't shouted me out this week. Like, what's happened?
She vex.
Exactly. But no, absolutely legendary. I think I just need to. There's no one else in the studio, but I'm just gonna do it by myself, man. Make some noise in the building for tonight's In Depth. It doesn't get any more legendary.